Some objects are never meant to be taken home. Daniel didn't know that when he picked up a small, mysterious box he found lying on the street. At first, it seemed like a harmless discovery, but that simple decision would soon lead to one of the strangest nights of his life. When something is left as an offering, it is no longer just a physical thing, it becomes a vessel. And when we bring these vessels into our private space, we aren't just bringing an antique, we are inviting everything it carries into our lives. Daniel was about to learn that the hard way. And it makes you wonder, what if the thing you think you found was actually the one that found you?
Brazil is a place where strange things happen with a frequency that surprises even those used to supernatural accounts. In many regions, different spiritual beliefs have lived side by side for centuries. Some of these traditions involve ancient spiritual practices, often performed quietly and away from curious eyes. In many of these practices, offerings are left behind: food, drinks, flowers, and sometimes objects. To those who understand these traditions, every element has meaning, every object has a purpose. But to someone unfamiliar with these customs, it might simply look like a few forgotten items scattered on the ground. It was in a situation exactly like this that a sequence of unsettling events began. It all started with a young man named Daniel. Daniel was a practical person. He liked simple explanations for things and never paid much attention to spiritual or religious topics. Those subjects simply didn't interest him. To him, they were personal beliefs that belonged to other people's lives. His own routine was ordinary. Most days followed the same rhythm: work, the walk home, a quick stop at the market sometimes, and quiet evenings. One afternoon, as the sun began to sink behind the buildings, Daniel was walking home exactly as he always did. The city was entering that strange moment between day and night, when the streets begin to grow quieter and the air changes in a way that's difficult to describe. On his way home, there was a small square.
Daniel crossed it often. It wasn't anything special, just a shortcut that saved him a few minutes. A few old trees stood scattered around a dirt path that cut across the grass. People walked dogs there during the day, and sometimes children played nearby. But that afternoon, something unusual caught his attention. Near one of the trees, something was scattered on the ground. At first, Daniel noticed the popcorn, white pieces scattered across the grass, as if someone had dropped them by accident. Then he noticed a few bottles nearby. It looked like the remains of some kind of small gathering, maybe food or drinks left behind after someone had been there earlier. But there was something else, something that clearly didn't belong among those simple items. Right in the middle of the scattered popcorn sat a small wooden box. Daniel slowed his steps and moved closer. It immediately caught his attention. The box looked old, much older than anything someone would casually leave in a park. The wood was dark, aged with time, and its surface was covered in detailed carvings. Delicate symbols and ornaments had been carefully etched into the sides, forming patterns that seemed both artistic and mysterious. Even covered in a thin layer of dust, the object was striking. It looked like something that belonged inside an antique shop, not lying forgotten beneath a tree. Daniel crouched slightly and picked it up. The box was heavier than he expected. He turned it slowly in his hands, studying the carved designs along the sides. His fingers traced the grooves in the wood, feeling the precision of the craftsmanship. It was beautiful, truly beautiful. For a moment, he simply admired the object, curious about where it might have come from. Then he placed the box inside the plastic bag he was already carrying and continued walking home. To Daniel, it was simply an interesting object he had found along the way. He didn't give much thought to the place where he had found it. Back at home, his routine continued exactly as it always did. He watered the plants on the porch, he fed the cat that circled his legs impatiently. The plastic bag containing the box was placed casually on the kitchen table. Daniel didn't even think about opening it yet. That night, he had plans to visit Mariana, his girlfriend. They had been together for some time, and their evenings together were simple and comfortable. Sometimes they cooked dinner together, other times they opened a bottle of wine and watched a movie while talking about their day. Mariana loved unusual objects, decorative pieces with history behind them. Antiques fascinated her.
And the small wooden box Daniel had found would fit perfectly among the other curious items she kept around her apartment. A few hours later, Daniel left the house carrying the same bag. Inside it were two things, a bottle of wine and the small wooden box. When he arrived at Mariana's apartment, the atmosphere was warm and familiar. He placed the bag on the living room table and pulled out the wine first. Then he removed the box. A thin layer of dust still covered the lid. Daniel brushed it away with his hand before placing it gently on the table. Even before being opened, the box seemed captivating. The carvings on its surface seemed almost hypnotic, forming patterns that suggested a story no one present could fully understand. For a few moments, Mariana simply examined the object. Her fingers moved across the wood, following the shapes engraved there. But the box remained closed, silent, still.
Dinner passed in a relaxed and familiar way. They talked about ordinary things, work, plans for the weekend, little details from the day. The wine disappeared slowly from their glasses. Later, as they often did, they moved to the bedroom and chose a movie to watch before sleeping. The wooden box was left on the nightstand beside the bed, still closed, still silent, almost forgotten. The movie continued playing quietly as fatigue from the day began to take over. Mariana fell asleep first. Daniel noticed that her sleep seemed unusually restless. She shifted in bed more than usual, as if caught in an uneasy dream. But Daniel didn't think much of it. A few minutes later, he fell asleep too. For a while, the night was perfectly calm. Everything seemed normal. But at some point during the early hours of the morning, Daniel opened his eyes and immediately felt that something was wrong. He didn't know how much time had passed. Minutes, maybe hours, but suddenly he was awake. The room was dark, illuminated only by a faint line of streetlight filtering through the window. Everything was silent, too silent. Daniel tried to move. Nothing happened. His body simply wouldn't respond. He tried again. He attempted to lift his arm. Nothing. He tried to shift his legs beneath the blanket. Nothing. It felt as if his entire body had become completely unresponsive. Confusion came first, then the fear. Daniel tried to speak. He wanted to call Mariana's name, but no sound came out, not even a whisper. The air in the room felt heavy. Breathing became difficult, as if an invisible weight was pressing down on his chest. Daniel could see the room clearly. He could hear the quiet hum of the city outside. But inside his own body, he was completely trapped. Then something even stranger began to happen. For reasons he could never fully explain, Daniel began to perceive the room from a different perspective.
At the same time that he felt himself lying in bed, he also had the strange impression of observing the scene from somewhere outside his body. There he was, lying beside Mariana, completely motionless. The sensation was impossible to understand. It felt unreal, and yet it was happening. Daniel tried desperately to move, to wake Mariana, to make any kind of sound, but his body remained frozen. Then he heard something. At first the sounds were faint, almost impossible to identify. Soft murmurs somewhere in the darkness. They weren't clear voices. They weren't footsteps. They were simply sounds that didn't seem to belong in the quiet room.
Daniel focused all his effort on one thought, calling Mariana's name again and again in his mind, but nothing changed. For a terrifying moment, a thought crossed his mind. Something is very wrong.
Time seemed to stretch in a strange way. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt like something longer. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. His lungs filled with air again. His body reacted. Daniel sat up abruptly, breathing hard. His heart was racing. Beside him, Mariana woke up at the same moment. She looked confused, frightened. Her expression showed clearly that her sleep had not been peaceful either. The two of them sat in silence for a moment, trying to understand what had just happened. Then, something else occurred. A sudden gust of wind swept through the room. Not a gentle breeze, a strong movement of air that pushed the curtains sharply aside. And on the bookshelf across the room, something fell. Out of dozens of perfectly arranged books, only one dropped to the floor. The sound echoed through the apartment. Daniel and Mariana both turned to look. The book had fallen open, and just as suddenly as the wind had appeared, it stopped. Silence returned. Daniel slowly walked toward the fallen book. When he picked it up, he noticed the title. It was a book about spiritism, written by Allan Kardec. But what caught his attention most was the page it had opened to. It was a prayer traditionally used for spiritual protection. Daniel stared at the words for several seconds. The room felt quiet again, but something about the atmosphere still felt different. In the days that followed, small things began to change. Mariana struggled to sleep. Her nights were restless. A few days later, she experienced something she could barely explain. It felt like she was awake, and yet not fully awake. She sensed the apartment around her, but at the same time, she had the strange impression that her body was somewhere else. She seemed to be standing in the living room, and yet she knew her body was still in bed. The apartment looked darker than usual, the shadows deeper. Then she heard a sound. Knocking. Slow. Firm knocks on the apartment door, as if someone outside wanted to enter. But no one moved. No one answered. Then she noticed something else. In the corner of the room, a small point of light appeared. Soft. Faint. It pulsed gently in the darkness. And in that moment, a simple thought formed in her mind. Pray. Mariana began to recite the prayer she had learned as a child, the Lord's Prayer. As the words formed in her thoughts, the atmosphere began to change. The heaviness slowly faded. Moments later, she woke up in bed. Her heart was pounding. Goosebumps covered her arms. But the prayer was still forming on her lips. 2 days later, something else happened. A plant Mariana cared for deeply, once vibrant and green, had suddenly withered. In only 2 days, its leaves had dried completely. Daniel finally decided he couldn't ignore these events anymore. He contacted a friend named Lucas. Lucas was known in his community as a respected spiritual leader who helped people understand experiences that felt difficult to explain. Daniel described everything that had happened. Lucas listened carefully. Then he asked a simple question. When did all of this begin?
Daniel thought for a moment. Everything had started during the same week. Then, Lucas asked if anything unusual had happened around that time. A visitor, a gift, something unexpected. And that was when Daniel remembered the square, the popcorn, the bottles, and the wooden box. Lucas immediately became serious. He asked Daniel not to touch the object again and said he would visit the apartment the following day. When Lucas arrived the following day, he brought 2 assistants with him. The atmosphere in the apartment felt tense.
Lucas approached the table where the box rested. He placed his hands gently on the lid and opened it. Inside was a small bundle wrapped in dark cloth. When Lucas began to unwrap it, his body reacted immediately. His shoulders tensed, his breathing changed, his movements became rigid. The assistants quickly began reciting prayers, moving herbs through the air in slow, deliberate gestures. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Inside the cloth was a golden medallion marked with unusual symbols. Lucas carefully wrapped the object again. Slowly, the tension in the room faded. Lucas later explained that the object was connected to a spiritual practice and should never have been removed from its place. He took the box with him to place it somewhere safe. After that night, the apartment returned to normal. The nights were quiet again. The heaviness in the air disappeared. Daniel eventually became curious about spiritual subjects he had once ignored, but one lesson stayed with him above all others. Some things simply are not meant to be taken home, and some burdens were never ours to carry.
Sometimes the things we bring home aren't just objects. Sometimes they're problems that were never ours to carry in the first place. Just like Daniel discovered, not everything we find along the way is meant to become part of our lives. Some things appear only to test our curiosity, and the wisest choice is simply to leave them behind. What about you? If you found a mysterious box in a park tomorrow, would you take it home? Have you ever brought something strange into your house and later regretted it? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about strange and unexplained events, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the most ordinary moments can lead to the most unbelievable stories. Stay with us here on After That Night, and remember, some things are better left exactly where they are.